Hi long range hunting, welcome back to another video about bullets. Today we're going to be talking about match and hunting bullets, and specifically ones that share names. All right, let's dive in and start with the Bergers. Now, this is the one that kind of has caused a lot of confusion, whereas you have your target and your hunting. Now, they're the same bullet, same jacket, same core. The only difference is the hunting version has a really thin jacket. The purpose behind this is to have a bullet that will fragment and open up and just cause massive trauma, dumping all the energy into that animal, even at long range. It's a frangible round, basically. Gives you really good terminal performance. Well, some do. And then you have the target one, where basically it's got a thicker jacket so that you can practice with it. The reason being is you want to be able to shoot that thing all day long. And what they were finding is with that really thin jacket on the hunting, when the gun really got hot and it was cranking them out there, it would soften that jacket and you could have deforming on the jacket, causing issues with your ballistics. Now, they're not a great bullet, unfortunately. It's a standard boat tail hollow point design, and so it falls into the same issues as like the Sierra Match King, where it can clog and just pencil through, or tumbling, changing directions, or just not getting a lot of expansion, period. I have a video on that. You guys can go watch the gel on that. I actually spent a lot of time on these bullets. When they first came out, I ended up testing them for about 6 months in one of my new guns, trying to find out what I was going to use for hunting, and wasn't exactly thrilled with what I got. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. I got far superior results with the ELD match, so I ended up going with that. These, even Berger's gone away from them. They have the new hybrid design, which you have a good design. You have a small hole for aerodynamics, but that tip, there's an empty cavity in there, a large one, and what happens is upon impact it collapses on that and forces that massive expansion, whereas you don't have that with the VLDs. All the bullets so far with Bergers are of hybrid design besides these, so you have, you know, your classic hunter and your target hybrid, which, if go ahead and pause on this, you can read all through it. But what you saw there is them admitting that one hunting and one, like the classic hunter and stuff, they're the same thing. It's just a different label. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. It's not that match bullets aren't for hunting. There's contracts and stuff that dictate that. And so which one gets labeled as a quote unquote target, it's still being used for killing. It's just going to places where they're used in combat for snipers and stuff. So it still has to have the good terminal ballistics. It's just what label is slapped on it. So, you know, just FYI, just because it's labeled match does not mean that it's not used for hunting or doesn't have good terminal ballistics. Now with these, a lot of people say 1800 feet per second as far as minimum impact velocity for these. I don't believe that for a second. This is at just over 1800 feet per second, and you can see it did not perform. You know, honestly, 2000 feet per second is more what I recommend for these projectiles, just to prevent any issues. And when you get down to there, really recommend trying to hit bones, getting high shoulder shots, etc. If you're going to go with Berger, I highly recommend you go with other than the VLD, and forget all the marketing BS. You know, pick a bullet, whether it's a Target or the Hunter Classic or OTM, whatever you want to use, and use it, because it's going to give you good performance and accuracy, and you just shoot that one bullet. No need to buy one that's quote unquote hunting and one that's target and getting subpar results. So this is kind of the bad boy that started this mass confusion on this topic. Now this next one is a doozy because there's a lot of confusion. It shares names, but it's not the same at all. And that has to do with the TMK, which is the Tip Match Kings. You have the Game Kings and you have the Tipped Game Kings. Now, I just did a test on the Tipped Game Kings, and it wasn't that great, which I've used them for. I knew they weren't. And a lot of people are confused because they think the original Game King, this is just a ballistic tip version. You have a larger cavity and you have a polymer tip. That's not actually true. So even though Sierra says it's basically a Sierra Match King with a tip, I'm not sure why they tell people that, but I've heard that one a lot. It's actually not. In fact, it is different than any bullet that Sierra has ever produced. It's a much thicker jacket than any of the other ones, and it's not pure lead. All the other bullets are pure lead. This is some kind of harder lead alloy. I'm not sure why they did this, but they did. The result is not as good terminal ballistics. Now, if you stay within the higher minimum impact velocity of that, and especially if you take high shoulder shots, it's going to aid you in better performance, but there's far superior bullets to it. But a lot of people think that with the TMK, the Tip Match King, and the Tipped Game King, that it's the same thing as the VLDs, to where you use the TMK, the match bullet, and then you hunt with this, and they're completely different bullets. And so you're going to get not only different trajectories, but you're going to get different performance, drastically different performance. If you look at the actual original Game King, which had two, one was a soft tip or a soft point, and the other one was an open tip. And both of them are good bullets. You can see there's that cavity inside of there, and it's also very thin jacketed. It's the same thickness as the Sierra Tipped Game Kings and the Match Kings. So the original one, which cracks me up because I get people all the time that talk about you need a thick bonded bullet in order to get good performance on animals, and then they absolutely rave about the original Game Kings, saying, oh well, you know, a thin jacketed bullet couldn't do this. This is great performance. When in reality, it's got the same exact jacket thickness as this. It's a match bullet thickness. That's why they're getting such good terminal ballistics, but they believe because it has hunting that it's something that it's not. So it always cracks me up because that really shows they don't know what they're talking about, but it's ironic that they will say that. You know, they'll say, oh, well, this can't do that. It's not a good bullet. It's, you know, the jacket's too thin. And they'll be like, oh, this gives me great performance. And it's the same jacket thickness. So once again, these are not the same thing. They are very different bullets. I'm not sure why Sierra says that it's comparable to the Sierra Match King, or why they went with such a thick jacketed bullet when they already have incredible bullets. Now let's dive into the one that I get the absolute most about, and that has to do with the ELD line from Hornady. Now, just like Sierra, these are not the same. If you talk about the ELDX, which is an marketed expanding, and then you have the ELDM, people have that same assumption that you have one that's just a target bullet and then an identical one basically with a thicker jacket that is for hunting. Not even remotely true. The jacket thickness is very different. The thickness on the ELDX is significantly more. But on top of that, they're not even remotely the same bullet. The ELDX is actually an improved version of the SST. It has the exact same jacket, jacket thickness, jacket taper, etc. All that's different is it has the new heat-resistant tip, and it's slightly more aerodynamic. That is it. You get a slightly higher BC and a new tip. That's it. So we're not talking about major differences. It's just an improved SST. It's got a non-bonded lock ring in there, whereas the ELD match is actually an improved AMAX. So ironically, these three right here, you have the AMAX, the ELD match, and the A-tip, are all the same thing. One's just an improved version. First you had the AMAX, Then they did an improved version with the ELD match, and then the A tip is an improved version of the ELD match. Now this did give a new tip. You do have that aluminum tip versus the polymer tip on this, but they have exact same terminal performance across the board. I've killed animals with all three, and it's all been absolutely devastating. If you set them next to each other, you can barely tell any difference at all. I mean, you're getting good performance. They have the same jacket, core, basic design. Now, I have found with the aluminum tips, you do get a little bit more penetration as, it just being a harder metal. And once it penetrates, it gets a little bit more before opening up versus the ELD match, but that's really the only difference. You're just getting a little bit more penetration. But unfortunately, because it shares the name ELD with the ELDX, people think that it's under the same boat of you use one for hunting because it's expanding, and then you practice with the ELD match and then hunt with the ELDX. Not remotely true. You're going to have different BCs, you're going to have different ballistics, you're going to have a different minimum impact velocity. The minimum impact velocity of the ELDX is around 1,800 feet per second. Now, it's actually higher than that. That's what it's classified as. From what I've seen, not so much. So I honestly wouldn't recommend going under 2,000 feet per second with them, but that's up to the individual. That's where I've seen expansion as far as what I would be happy with towards that low end. Now with the ELD match, we've had expansion down to 1,300 to 1,400 feet per second, depending on the impact resistance and depth of penetration as far as that animal. So on something where you don't have as much impact resistance or depth of penetration required, you're going to be at that 1,400 mark. If you go on something that's more dense, higher impact resistance and more depth of penetration to aid in that expansion, especially adding bones, you can go down to 1,300 feet per second. So completely different bullets, not remotely the same. Honestly, I don't know why they named it ELDX, because in reality, it's not even the same bullet remotely. I would like to have seen them do a different name as far as that goes, but it is what it is. So I don't make the bullets, I just, talk about them. Now in conclusion, I hope this has helped. They're not even remotely the same. You have the Bergers. Again, they've gone away from this. Do they still produce it? Yes, but all their new designs are going away. They're not producing new VLDs. There's a big difference. This is what you're talking about when you have actual bullets, one hunting, one target. The Sierras aren't like that, and neither are the Hornadies. So, don't think that you can get the tipped Game King and the tipped Match King and use one for practice and then go take a shot with this, because you're getting different shapes, you're getting different ballistics. I mean, I get they look alike. That's one of the confusing parts, is they share a name and then they also look very similar, but they are not the same bullet. And so you can't just pick one for practice and one for, hunting. And again, especially at long range, that's where it really becomes a factor, because at short range, you're not seeing those differences really magnified. And so you might be an inch off or whatever from your zero with this, if you're at 100 yards. But when you start getting out to, further distances, what we primarily do, you're going to have major issues that can end up in wounding, especially because one doesn't perform as well as the other, and, missed or bad shots. Anything to take away from this is, just because it shares a name and looks slightly alike does not mean that it's the same or that one is equal to the other. I mean, the Tip Match King absolutely destroys the Tip Game King in performance. Again, you can watch those videos on that. And the AMAX, ELD Match, and A-Tip whole lineup will absolutely destroy the ELDX in performance. Now, if you're at high velocity, when you're really up there, the difference, if you watch gel test, difference between the ELDX and the ELDM looks similar, but where you're really seeing that separation is once you start diving down in velocity. That's where that difference, that separation, is really going to show in that performance. You're getting different impact velocities as far as your minimum impact velocity. So there's a lot of different factors here that go into it. Marketing is marketing. Now, I understand marketing I don't like it, but I understand it. And a lot of people have confusion on that. They think, oh, well, this is what the company says. But what marketing basically is a white lie. You know, it's a little bit of exaggeration. It's like a hunter or fisherman. Your buck, you add a couple extra points to it, or you add, a few inches, and you shot a 140 and all of a sudden magic becomes a 145. So is it, it's kind of a white lie. Marketing, it's like, hey, here's a turd, polish it up, and this is the best thing you can absolutely get. And, they're trying to sell a product. So it's not necessarily reality. And a lot of people don't understand that. I hope this has helped some people understand that just because it's marketed for one thing doesn't mean it's used for that. There are similarities. If you're talking about the original Game Kings and the tip to match Kings, they have the same jacket thickness. That's why you're getting such good results with the original, but this adding that tip gives you a far superior, not only BC, but in the terminal ballistic side too, because it has that larger cavity and it has that ballistic tip to force expansion. So they're very, very different bullets. Don't confuse this. I can't stress that enough. The VLDs are kind of over in a world all their own, and the rest of these are not in the same ballpark. I hope this has helped everybody. We got a lot more coming. I'm working on the podcast, getting that set up. Real quick too, I'm sure you guys are wondering what this GoPro is doing there. I recently updated some stuff. I was using the GoPro Hero 9 Black in 4K. I ended up picking up 2, including the one that's recording, of the new Hero 10 Blacks, and got full media kits. So I've got directional mic, lights, screen, the whole 9 yards. So there's a lot coming as far as, new footage and equipment. I also am going to be getting some new lighting systems to, get better lighting in here so you guys can see. And we're going to plug away and keep doing stuff. Ballistics gels testing is going to come up pretty soon. Got to get back out there and do that. So I hope everybody has enjoyed this video. Stick around. We got a lot more coming. Everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video. And happy hunting!